Hey guys, welcome back. This is Anna with Rewind Cardiology, and today we're going to be talking about staging aortic stenosis, which, let's be honest, can be a little confusing. So let's jump right into it. Aortic stenosis is defined as a narrowing of the aortic valve area causing outflow obstruction. And according to the ACC/AHA 2020 guidelines, there are 4 stages of aortic stenosis, each defined by specific hemodynamic and anatomic parameters. These parameters include mean transvalvular pressure gradient, or delta P, is the difference in pressure between the left ventricle and the aorta during forward flow. Peak aortic jet velocity, or Vmax, is the highest recorded velocity of blood flowing across the aortic valve. Stroke volume index, or SVI, is the amount of blood ejected from the left ventricle with each cardiac cycle indexed to body surface area. And lastly, left ventricular ejection fraction, or LVEF, is the volumetric fraction of fluid ejected out of the left ventricle with each contraction. Great. So we've laid the groundwork. Let's talk about staging. Mild aortic stenosis is defined as a delta P of less than 20 millimeters of mercury, or a Vmax of 2.0 to 2.9 meters per second. Mild aortic stenosis is stage B. Moderate aortic stenosis is defined as a delta P of 20 to 39 millimeters of mercury, or a Vmax of 3.0 to 3.9 meters per second. Like mild AS, moderate AS is also stage B. I want to take a break here and point out that neither mild or moderate aortic stenosis use valve size as a staging parameter. Moving on, we have severe aortic stenosis, which is loosely defined as a delta P greater than 40 millimeters of mercury, or a Vmax greater than 4 meters per second. Now, full disclaimer, severe aortic stenosis is complicated, and we'll talk about it more here in a second. Finally, we have very severe aortic stenosis, which follows all of the same patterns as severe AS that we'll talk about next, but has higher pressures and velocities. Specifically, a delta P greater than 60 millimeters of mercury and a Vmax greater than 5 meters per second. Okay, let's talk specifically about severe aortic stenosis. Within severe, there are 4 subcategories. The first is severe high-gradient aortic stenosis with a normal ejection fraction. These patients will have a normal EF defined as greater than 50% and have either a delta P greater than 40 millimeters of mercury or a Vmax greater than 4 meters per second. The guidelines do note that this population tends to have an aortic valve area, or AVA, less than 1 centimeter squared, but that is not required to have high gradient aortic stenosis with a normal ejection fraction. In terms of determining the grade, if the patient has symptoms, it's stage D1. If the patient has no symptoms, it's stage C1. Awesome. Let's move on to the next subtype of severe aortic stenosis, severe high gradient aortic stenosis with reduced ejection fraction. Similar to before, this requires either a delta P greater than 40 millimeters of mercury or a Vmax greater than 4 meters per second, and an LVEF less than 50%. Again, very similar to prior, while it is typically associated with a small AVA or AVAI, that is not a requirement. If your patient meets all of these requirements, they have stage C2, aortic stenosis. Next, we have severe low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis with reduced ejection fraction. This subtype is also referred to as classic low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis. For this subtype, the valve area, either AVA or AVAI, must be less than or equal to 1 centimeter squared or 0.6 centimeters squared per meter squared, respectively. Additionally, it must include either a delta P less than 40 millimeters of mercury or a Vmax less than 4 meters per second. We won't go into the reasons why during this video, but for severe low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis with reduced EF, the findings must be confirmed with dobutamine stress echo. If your patient meets all of the above criteria, then they have stage D2 aortic stenosis. Next, we have severe low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis with normal ejection fraction. This subtype is sometimes referred to as paradoxical low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis. By definition, it must have an AVA of less than or equal to 1 centimeter squared, or an AVA-I of less than 0.6 centimeter squared per meter squared, an SVI of less than 35 mLs per meter squared, and either a delta P of less than 40 millimeters of mercury or a Vmax less than 4 meters per second. If your patient meets these criteria, they have stage D3 aortic stenosis. I'll go ahead and pause here and point out that the only stage of aortic stenosis that has a valve size requirement is classic or paradoxical low-flow, low-gradient aortic stenosis. And that's it. That wraps up all of the stages of aortic stenosis. Whew! Just kidding. If you've been paying attention, you might be like, Anna, what about stage A? Stage A is defined as a normal Vmax and normal leaflet motion. And it really just describes those patient populations that are at risk for developing aortic stenosis. So patients with a bicuspid aortic valve, or sclerosis without stenosis. Okay, now we're done. I hope you've enjoyed this quick overview on grading aortic stenosis. See you next time.